Okay. Yes, I've let everybody in. I'll control the audience. Go ahead.
So, hello everyone. Warm greetings of the day to everyone who has taken out time to join this webinar. I am Kahini Oja, researcher at UITP India office, and I welcome you all on behalf of UITP India to our webinar on low emission zones, lessons learned and path ahead. With a strong resolve to promote public transport and mitigate air pollution, one of the projects that UITP India team is working on is enabling mechanisms for development of low emission zones in India. The project aims to develop a holistic policy framework for implementation of low emission zones in the Indian cities through three major activities. The first activity is the international case study and online peer review, which the knowledge brief has been prepared, which we are going to launch in today's webinar. This would be followed by two more activities, one on narrative building and stakeholder consultation with the city selected under the project. And finally, the last activity would be the LEZ selection in the respective cities, in-person peer review, and supporting pilot projects in the cities that were being selected. So the concept of LEZ has emerged as a noteworthy measure to enhance the quality of life of the citizens in the contemporary world that is battling with the detrimental impacts of climate change and air pollution. And the aim of this webinar is knowledge sharing on sustainable urban development around the concept of LEZ, with focus on learnings from cities across the globe that have successfully implemented LEZ and the potential that the concept has in getting implemented in the Indian context. So it's a humble request to the audience to please mute yourself while the speakers are presenting and post your questions in the chat box, which we would be taking up at the end of the webinar. Now, with a further delay, I would like to introduce Mr. Martin Lutz, air quality consultant for the European Union Commission. In his professional journey spanning over 30 years, he has managed winter smog alarm with traffic bans for polluting vehicles in Berlin's Environment Department, worked with the European Commission for developing the European Union strategy against ozone pollution, developed air quality strategy in Berlin as head of the Air Quality Management Department, and extensively promoted clean transport modes and innovative vehicle propulsion technologies while developing and implementing the LEZ scheme. He has also been an advisor on air quality management in Eastern Europe, Turkey, Mexico, China, India, and Southeast Asia. It is my pleasure to welcome Martin and request him to please share his screen and give the keynote address. Over to you, Martin. Martin, you're on mute.
Ah, first mistake. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Kaini, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to join this webinar on low emission zone. So that's the big topic also of my work. And now we'll see how I will manage to share the right screen, which might be this one, and open the presentation. Now it's the question, do you see the presenters mode or the presentation mode?
See it in the presentation mode. So if you can just put it in the presenter, I mean, it's in the presenter mode. If you can just put it in the presentation mode.
I can switch it. Is it now better?
Yeah,
Do you
it's
have
better now.
the full screen? Great. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to introduce that webinar, which is, I mean, the reason is fantastic that you have come up with a quite informative briefing note on how to introduce this concept of low emission zones. And I want to highlight, firstly, why have we introduced these schemes all over Europe? What was the reason? What was the driver? And going back to Berlin, maybe, how is it embedded in a larger picture? And I mentioned here this no diesel without filter strategy, where the low emission zone played a key role. And one slide on the impact based on Berlin's assessment, but it's a representation of results elsewhere in Europe, at least, on what the low emission zone did good for the environment. And what have we learned? Um, this is a picture showing Europe, and it's interesting that if you compare it with India, you could say, well, the European Union could be the Indian national government, the national state, while the member states are maybe the states in India. And then we have states in Germany. So we have a federal structure in Germany, which is comparable with India, with the exception that Germany is, of course, a tiny country in comparison to yours. So you could say, well, the cities, the regions are the German federal states. So in order to compare that a little bit, and if I refer to governance levels, then you can imagine where you would land if you would apply the situation to your country. Um, let's have a look at the governance framework in Europe on air quality management. So we have a sort of political manifesto. So we want to have a toxic-free environment, protecting the health and well-being of people. This is a nice paper, and then now we have to break it down into regulatory bits and pieces, and we have the right side improving the air quality, and of course you wouldn't be able to do that without controlling emissions, and that's why we have an air quality directive, which has recently, only 2-3 weeks ago, updated, setting air quality standards and requiring air quality plans, and then we have a variety of regulations controlling the emissions of mobile sources, of stationary sources, of products, agriculture, ammonia emissions. And then we have the national level coming in here with national strategies. So on the member states levels, this would be your states, inter alia, providing incentives, fiscal incentives for clean technologies, and providing a legal framework for local measures. Because this should already bring us close to full compliance with air quality standards, but there is a gap here, and this needs to be filled by the local air quality plans. And here the LEZ appears. The low emission zone, access restrictions for polluting vehicles, and that's why it's linked to national regulatory measures, because you can't do that on a local scale without, for instance, a sticker system or a harmonized framework. What is required by vehicles wanting to enter a city? And this needs to be harmonized and linked to requirements in technical terms and so on. These are the drivers, our air quality standards. And as I was saying, we have a new set to be attained by 2030. This is what we have at the moment on the left side here, with a allowed number of exceedance days for PM10, a very tough NO2 annual average of 40 microgram, which has been the same that then in the previous list of guideline values provided by the WHO. And these are now much stricter, but that's not my point. The point is that these limit values were legally binding. That means that citizens were enabled to sue an administration for not doing bringing forward sufficient measures. And we have the European Commission, so that's the watchdog, the administrative body of the European Union, which have the right to sue a member state for being lazy and missing the deadlines here indicated in the table. And this was the big driver, and this was the legal reason why we have these low emission zone schemes. So as far as Berlin is concerned, and maybe other cities as well, the question is, why did we use, why did we apply that idea? And the reason was 15 years ago or 20 years ago that we have a model calculation showing a lot of red lines here. These are all the roads where we had an excess of the limit value for PM2.5 and PM10. And this was a big problem, and it was clear that road traffic was the main contributor. So you always need to look into the sources. Where does it come from? So this is an absolutely essential exercise at the beginning, that you know where the problem is. Is it traffic, or is it industry? Is it small business? Is it the agriculture? Whatever. And here it turned out that as far as PM10 and NO2 is concerned, traffic comes out as the main contributor. Of course, that was clear from the beginning, and of course we had a transport planning framework, but that turned out to be insufficient. And also we had a retrofit program to build in particle traps into the buses, the diesel buses at that time. And this was, of course, a nice measure, but it was not sufficient. So it was clear that we needed to capture, to target the whole diesel vehicle fleet in the city, and applying in particular filter technology to the existing vehicle stock. And this was clear from the beginning, and it was supported by WHO, classifying black carbon as toxic, as cancerogenous. So it was clear that we needed to get rid of that fine diesel particles. And there are other machineries, for instance, non-road, where this low emission zone idea could be applied as well. And of course, and that has been neglected for quite some time. It's a climate driver as well. We are talking about climate policy. And here, air quality management and climate policy comes together. And combating black carbon emissions is good for air quality, for public health, and for climate as well. I don't want to go into detail because you have nicely captured the Berlin case in your briefing paper. So just remembering that this was the low emission zone, capturing or covering a essential part of Berlin city, introduced in 2 stages with a lot of filter retrofits, because we had a upgrade built into the scheme, so that you could, if you retrofitted your car, you could upgrade your vehicle to that green sticker, which was the compliant requirement, Euro 4 at the time in 2010. Berlin was, of course, not the only city. We had more than 70 cities alone in Germany, and it spread around that idea that you could accelerate the introduction of clean technologies by keeping the old stuff out of cities. Huh? And this low emission zone idea has then been applied in more than 250 cities European-wide. I can recommend to visit that website, Urban Access Restrictions or Regulations, which gives a fantastic overview of low emission zone scheme, also of road pricing schemes, and all sorts of access restrictions in Europe. This is the slide which appears in your briefing paper. It shows the impact of the low emission zone in Berlin and Germany. In particular, the drop of black carbon is eye-catching here in that graph, in that trend graph showing the measured EC is elementary carbon concentrations in Berlin. And after we started with the low emission zone, you can see that the concentration dropped quite drastically. What was disappointing was the impact, the success on NO2, and this was unfortunately due to that diesel scandal, that industry, that our type approval regulations were not watertight enough, so that car industry could cheat and bring on the market vehicles which were not better in terms of their real driving emissions of nitrogen oxides, and this was unfortunately the reason why this scheme didn't work in that particular situation. Now let's have a few conclusions. We could move towards full compliance, and the LEZ helped quite a lot. And it's interesting that if you look ahead into the future, at least here in Europe, we are talking about zero emission zones now, to get rid of ICE, the internal combustion engine driven vehicles, and accelerate the electrification, the climate compatibility of vehicle fleets. And here this idea of keeping polluting equipment out of an area is a fantastic approach, which could be used and will be used in the future. What is needed is a national regulatory framework. In any case, whatever you would do, it's not appropriate to stick to a local scheme which cannot be applied somewhere else, because vehicles are mobile. So you always drive with your car, vehicle, whatever it is, from one city to another. And if you have different schemes, it would be a nightmare. And of course, you need harmonized requirements, technical specifications, in particular for retrofit, which is a national job. So that's important, that that should not be left to municipalities, to city administrations, because then you will fail. What was clear that the LEZ is one measure among a list of actions, and it should be embedded into a sustainable city planning. And of course, there is not only the need to reduce air pollution. We have a noise problem. We have a climate problem. So we need to make the transport sector climate compatible. And apart from that, cars are requiring space, valuable space in our cities. So there's a transport and city planning needed to move towards livable cities, and this is, I think, the main aim here anyway. That we need to convince our citizens to move towards clean equipment, clean technologies, and hopefully change their behavior in terms of the choice of mobility means, and do not drive with cars which pollute the air and occupy the valuable space in cities. So this is an overarching communication strategy which is needed to make sure that LEZ and other measures are accepted. Of course, it should not result in this kind of sketch where you keep all the polluting stuff outside of an area, and of course people are living there and would suffer. And that's why I cannot stress that strong enough, that analysis needs to be a part of a larger strategy. And this was interesting. I was invited to the urban mobility conference in India, in Kochi, 2 years ago, and I made that photo, and I thought maybe this signpost should be extended to car free, because the car is sometimes considered as a drug. People get addicted, and in Kochi, in that part of the city, which is the island, they have nicely traffic calmed the area. So this is a nice template for a larger strategy, which could be stepwise implemented in India as well. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Martin, for setting the tone for the webinar. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Vipul Kumar, manager at UITP India, to launch a knowledge brief on low emission zones, key takeaways from early adapters, and throw some light on the research done. Vipul, you can share the screen now.
I hope you can see the screen.
Yeah, it's visible.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for introducing. As so, so basically, Kaini has already set the context on this low emission zone uh, project that we have been doing since June 2024, 23. So I'll just basically take you through the main findings of this particular knowledge brief. So uh, this brief, it's a compilation of 6 case studies that we have actually studied in detail through basically one-to-one interaction and also some of the secondary sources that we referred. And in this particular brief, we actually published some of the key takeaways from these six cities that we have studied in detail. So the methodology that we adopted for this particular brief is we started with the initial study of 25 cities across the globe, starting from Europe and also comprehensively covering the Asian region. So we studied some of the cities like London, Cologne, Milan, Paris, Barcelona, Amsterdam, and in Asia we covered cities like Tokyo, Beijing, Shenzhen, Seoul, and Hong Kong, so that we could comprehensively study the intervention in detail, as in which all cities had implemented LEZ in the area or what all key interventions they have taken. After that, we finally shortlisted 6 cities, which include London, Berlin, Paris, Brussels, Barcelona, and Seoul. And based on a few of the parameters like the area of intervention, what were the main key intervention for policies adopted by these cities. After that, we had a one-to-one interaction with the key experts from these 6 cities. So, like in Brussels, we had a interaction with the Brussels Environment Zone, which have been implementing LEZ. And similarly, in Seoul, we had a one-to-one interaction with Seoul Metropolitan Government. After this experts interviews, we finally narrowed down to the key takeaways from these 6 cities, and through the secondary sources and also the analysis which these experts provided us through sharing their various documents, maps, and finally you can see the brief which will be launching today as part of this webinar. Just a brief intro about what is a low emission zone. So it's a designated area that seeks to restrict or and basically restrict access to specific category of high polluting vehicles so as to improve the air quality. And it's a highly regulated zone supported by strong policies and robust data management. Uh, why do we need a LEZ? We have already talked about this in like we all know the effects of the air pollution in our cities, not just in India but also across the world. So these are a few of the statistics from the WHO organization. So like in India, we have around 2.18 million deaths per year due to outdoor air pollution from all sources. Uh, Talking about where is an LEZ established. So basically, we can start maybe with a very small pilot area in a central CBD district. So this is what is happening in the case of Shenzhen, where they have green logistics zone and they have high restrictions on the freight vehicles, which are highly polluting. In the case of Seoul, we have a green transport zone where it is applicable on a heritage area located in the central part of Delhi, or maybe we can have and LEZ throughout the city, which is in the case of London. So it depends on cities' political will, socioeconomic characteristics, and also the area of the implementation. When it is operational, so we have different types of LEZ. So maybe we can have a permanent LEZ which is operational throughout the year, which is in the case of London. We can have like a fixed period LEZ, which is in the case of Barcelona. So when the pollution levels really go higher, we actually so the city government put in some restrictions for the vehicles. Uh, this is just a brief idea of how an LEZ is implemented. So generally, a baseline study is conducted, then the city identifies a particular area of implementation for a phase-wise approach. So basically, it's like initially they would start with a very small area, analyze some of the results, and then gradually, if the impacts are positive, they would increase that particular area. We require some legislation or a strong policy backing for the implementation. And at the same time, we focus on the strengthening of non-motorized transport, public transport system, and infrastructure. This is again followed by stakeholder mapping, citizen awareness, feedback, and participation, and a robust data management for the monitoring of these interventions. Uh, okay, I'll just focus on the key takeaways from the 6 cities that we studied. This included London, Berlin, Paris, Brussels, Barcelona, and Seoul. So these are the some of the key factors that we studied. So like I'll just briefly talk about few of these. So in the case of which level are the LEZ implemented? So in the case of Berlin, we have a national level framework that is applicable all throughout the country of Germany. But in the case of Brussels, we have like something which is operational at a city and a metropolitan level. So, and if we talk about the improvement in the public transport, so London, Berlin have exclusively focused a lot, along with Brussels, Barcelona, Seoul, on improving the public transport, along with other implementation that are basically necessary for the implementation of LEZ. Now, the boxes where it is not ticked, that doesn't mean that this particular city doesn't have an intervention for maybe. So like in the case of Berlin, if we have not put a tick for the technology use, that does not mean they don't use technology, but maybe they have other factors that are more prior and have basically played a greater role in the implementation of the LEZ. And cities have focused a lot in the improvement in the non-motorized transport facilities, uh, promoting clean mobility vehicles, and also getting some financial aids by the government to support public through maybe scrappage policies or some of the retrofitting schemes. Uh, uh, these are the key 5 factors that we could derive for the successful implementation of the LEZ. So first one is the research and public awareness campaign. So in the case of Brussels, for example, I would like to highlight that they have a dedicated website, and they followed very rigorous campaigns for the dissemination of information with the public about LEZ. And they actually conducted like a 5-year long baseline study to see the impact of LEZ when it is finally being implemented. The other factors that played a key role are public transport NMT and cleaner mobility, stakeholder consultations, incentives and exemptions, and a strong political will. So we might all be aware about the case of London, where the mayor played a very active role in actually implementing the LEZ. Uh, uh, this is an ideal implementation framework that we could derive from this particular brief, and we think that something similar can be implemented in the case of LEZ implementation in India. So as part of the input, we conduct some data study assessment on the impact of the traffic on health and air quality, maybe some data through monitoring stations, and also some reports on the link between vehicular air pollution and the impact on health. Then we actually adhere to international air quality standard that are already implemented in India, or maybe some international targets that we have to adhere to. Taking these as the input, we finally take on the process of consultation and implementation, where we engage in a stakeholder consultation with relevant departments and organizations. We talk of certain provisions of incentives and exemptions. We focus on the creation of infrastructure and alternative solutions for mobility with a strong legal and policy backing. Uh, a phase-wise implementation approach can be adopted along with the uses of the technology to effectively monitor these initiatives. And then as a result, we expect that we would expect some increase in the adoption of cleaner and greener vehicles. We would see an improvement in the air quality, and also thereby improving the larger quality of life of the citizens. Uh, these are some of the existing regulatory scenarios in India. We think that that can be used for the effective implementation of LEZ. And before bringing in something a very new framework, because it is a very cumbersome process to have something legally uh, bring it between. So it's these existing regulatory mechanisms that we can actually focus on. So like maybe something if we talk about imposing the penalties and curbs on the vehicles in some of these areas. So this is already been implemented under say Central Motor Vehicles Act in 1988. We also have a National Urban Transport Policy 2006, which talks about the Unified Metropolitan Transport Authority and also creating an urban transport fund. So all these interventions can be actually they're taken care of while we talk to cities about implementing LEZ in their respective zones or areas. Some of these key factors that again can be considered is that when we talk about the regulatory authority, like who will implement it. So we already have some of these powers, maybe at the central, at the national level, state level, or the local self-government, which after a brief and detailed consultation with the relevant stakeholders can take up the implementation part. And then talking about the finance, as I talked about before, we like certain dedicated transport fund can be created by the state or the city level, so as to incentivize the citizens, maybe using scrappage policies or the retrofitting of their vehicles. The area of implementation, we can start somewhere from very small pockets around heritage monuments or some say, central business district. And then the other factors, maybe like the restrictions on vehicles. So you might be aware that we already have some of these provisions in the case of Delhi through GARP, Graded Response Action Plan, that comes into force when the air quality level is very severe in the case of Delhi, highly during winters. Uh, and then obviously these all these key factors have to be supported by some of the complementary measures that includes the creation of alternative infrastructures focusing exclusively on the NMT, increasing accessibility to the public transport through last mile connectivity. Uh, yeah, so this is all we have from this brief. I would request all of you to study this in detail. We have a detailed key interventions from all these 6 cities, and feel free to get back to us in case you have any doubts. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Vipul, for the presentation. Meanwhile, I would request all the people in the audience to post your questions in the chat box so that we can take it up at the end. Moving on to the panel discussion, let me introduce our esteemed panelists. We have Martin, we have Miss Lottie Sena, Transport and Urban Life Manager at Knowledge and Innovation UITP headquarters based out of Brussels. She has a background in spatial planning and geosciences and has held diverse roles in communication and supporting activities around placemaking, activations of public spaces for residents, and coordinating different working groups and sharing knowledge related to European placemaking network, along with managing research projects with special focus on sustainable urban mobility. We also have Ms. Sarika Pandabhat, Director Nagaro and Founder Trustee Rahagiri Foundation, who is an architect and urban planner with 15 years of experience in the field of urban development, transport, environment, and architecture, and is widely known for leading the Rahagiri Day movement in Haryana, which she is also helping replicate in the other cities. Sarika was also selected as one of the 60 global women leaders in the world who's making a change in how we move around the cities, and also been given the title of Bicycle Mayor of Gurugram. So, starting off with today's panel discussion, the first topical issue that we would like to hear from our speakers is what, in your opinion, should you think should be the major factors that one needs to consider while planning to implement LEZ in the city? So we can start with Martin.
Yeah, thank you. And compliments to Vipo, because this introduction and the overview was perfect. And you already mentioned one important factor, and this is to make sure at the beginning what's all about. So what are the expected impact, or the target you wanna achieve with the LEZ? This is absolutely key. So if you miss that, and the public won't understand um, why it's necessary, and um, also the promising argument why it will work and will help us to make our cities more livable and healthy, and save the climate, whatever it is. This is absolutely key. Otherwise, you're lost. Um, a second thing I want to mention is to start with tiny areas. This appeared on your slide, and I'm a little bit skeptical here, because if you want to make an impact on a vehicle fleet, and if you start with a very tiny area, people will drive around. There will be no impact, and you may even create the disadvantage of pushing traffic in other areas of your city, and people living there will not be happy, I can tell you. So I would rather go for a larger area and allow more time, more transition, adaptation, pre-warning, whatever it is. So these are 2 points I want to raise at the beginning. Maybe we can come back to that during the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Like we said, like the concept is very new to India. So we just started off maybe with a pilot study in small area, and later on maybe we can think of expansion. So moving on to the next speaker, Sarika, if you could please share your insights. Sarika, you're on mute. If you could please unmute yourself.
I think you need to unmute me. Yeah. Am I audible now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I also go with what Kahini said, because first it's a really new concept and we don't have demonstrated even a single low emission mobility zone, because we need to start telling it as a low emission mobility zone, because the perception in Indian cities are coming in very different way when we are calling it low emission zone, because there are other factors also which is addressing to emissions in our cities in India, specifically the electric the generator, the diesel generators, or waste burning, or multiple other factors which is basically contributing to emissions in many most of our cities actually. So when we're talking about low emission mobility zone, then we really need to focus on few of these areas, which is not small actually in terms of Indian context. These areas are not small, and it actually a ward level thing or something like that. So if we can just do 1 2 pilots to demonstrate that, oh, this can be workable, and these are the things that we can achieve, and these are the things we need to start with. Like for example, many cities I know still don't have electric rickshaws and other facilities to start with this low emission mobility zones, and how we can have more robust infrastructure for pedestrians and cyclists in that zone. So creating the smaller zones to scale it up will help us to conceptualize the low emission mobility zone in our country. This is the first thing. Second thing, I just want to highlight that we need to collect data. Problem is that we don't have solid data right now in India. The the kind of tailpipe emissions we have. In 2018, Terry and AI has done a study that, how 39% of these pollutants are coming from vehicular emissions, and 11% of the total deaths that is happening from the tailpipe emission. So we need this kind of data. This is for Delhi, but we need this kind of data for each of the cities that we want to start working on low emission mobility zones. So I think more research, more study, and data collections to actually influence and advocate for it will helpful, because finally we need to convince the government to implement it. They are the stakeholders. So we need, of course, the political will for this, but we can develop that will through data. So I think I want to highlight these 2 points. And of course, I also support that we need to start somewhere. And as you said, Martin, zero emission zones. So from last 10 years, Rahagiri Foundation is temporarily creating these zero emissions zones through our vehicle free Sundays that we have done almost across India, in almost 90 cities in India, where temporarily on Sundays we try to create this zero emission zones where vehicles are not allowed, only walking, cycling, and only people are allowed, not vehicles. So how to create more people oriented areas, more people oriented city, and breaking that myth that, if you are banning vehicle from certain area, that it is your going down, your business will hamper, or it will create negative impact to your business. That also we did a very in-depth study that it's always increase your business. And in one of the conference recently, I heard one of the very senior bureaucrat when he was saying that the low emission mobility zone should not be creating low economic zone, which is not true. So how we can have more data around it, best practices, as you given examples of Berlin or London or Seoul. So how we can get more of such case studies, the best practices, then we can slowly, going to this leaders who can finally take the decision. So these are few things I just want to highlight um, for the beginning of the conversation.
Thank you, Sarika. Lotte, if you could please share your views on this question.
Yes, I mean, how can I follow from that both of those responses, because so many of those points I think it's very important to address. I think Ms. Sarika, what you said about creating a vehicle-free days is really a great way of already starting to change people's perceptions of cities and the reduction of traffic, and so that this in itself also starts to enable the acceptance towards low emission zones and zero emission zones potentially for the future. I think as well, it's very important. We've talked about strong political will, but I mean, people can say they have acceptance towards low emission zones in theory. They want to reduce they want to improve air quality in their cities, but when it comes to practice, it can create a lot of disruption for people's day-to-day lives and added costs for them. So what cities, I mean, for example, in London, and also we now see with New York and the congestion charging that they have, that actually they're facing a lot of pushback that's then creating delays, added resources on the administration. And so really providing evidence-based materials and really a strong will to push forward with this, because it can create so much, additional pushback from both political from the public, but also the political parties. You will find that opposing political parties will often use this as leverage. And so it's also important to try and find mandates with cross-political party support. I find to be really important. Another thing is really, as already been mentioned before, but really looking at providing real alternatives, investing in walking, cycling and public transport. Once you've, defined the scope and the scale of your area, making sure that the people within that area have access to public transport, that they are not completely excluded from mobilizing themselves to get to work, to school, to recreational activities. And I know Vipul has already mentioned this in one of his slides, but really looking at developing public transport complementary services to make sure that we're not, excluding people. I think to the case of London, with their low emission zones, I mean, they've implemented this within a range of other measures. But for example, improving the accessibility of their stations, expanding the networks. For example, they have a Superloop bus network now, which is really kind of targeting the areas around the low emission, the ultra low emission zone in particular, to make sure that people can still, we're not just, pushing people to decarbonize their vehicle, but we're actually pushing them into, public transport and sustainable mobility options as well.
Yeah, thank you, Lottie. Like you pointed out, like there would be some sort of pushing back. So that brings me to the next question. There would be a lot of challenges that a city would face when it wants to implement, and of course, because there would be restrictions. So what are the different type of challenges that the city authority should keep in mind that it might face, and what are the strategies it should follow to mitigate those challenges? So we'll follow the same order. We'll start with Martin, then Sarika, and then Lottie.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it boils down to that balance between ambition and I would call it flexibility, because you cannot address all these very different situations and needs and problems in particular businesses have. That's why we started in a very early stage to invite business associations, industry and Chamber of Industry and Commerce, holy organizations, to already warn them that we need to be active and to do something, and describe a roadmap also in terms of time, because businesses and people, depending on their income and living with sort of operating vehicles, they need to know what will happen in the future in order to adapt. And adaptation is, of course, always expensive in a way, because you need to invest in cleaner vehicles, in maybe technical options, whatever it is, retrofitting. And it would always be good to have a funding scheme available. So having push and pull together, and to form a proportionate framework in a wider sense, and communicate that as early as possible. And I think that's a key thing.
I want to put together in another two things here. So basically, it's a chicken and egg situation, which we discussed earlier, that there should be public transport, there should be walking, cycling infrastructure. But I think in Indian context, we need to create that demand also somewhere, because people are right now not willing to come out from their comfort zone. And so that we need to look into how we can have a lot of stakeholder consultation, the focus group discussion with the local people there, because all the time we try to work on 2 low emission zones in India. I'm giving you my personal experience. The local market associations are the first people to actually oppose it. Basically, first they thought that the business will go down. That's the perception they have. So how to counter all that, how to bring them on board from the beginning in our first decision making process, and slowly build that confidence that how it is going to benefit their area in terms of quality of life, in terms of businesses, in terms of everything, in terms of a image building of that area. Yeah, when you are creating this kind of of low emission zones or zero emission zones, it gives that positive image to that area. It become more clean, it become more vibrant, it become more beautiful. So all this kind of thing we need to first I must say that we need to bring this all the stakeholders on board whenever we start planning to implement low emissions mobility zone. Second thing, we need to provide them the alternative first, that these are the facilities you have, and there has to be a mechanism if there are residential areas, what kind of assumptions we have, what kind of benefit they get out of it, do we have a common parking space for them, and whatever. Of course there will be some vehicle owners, and if it is a commercial area, what kind of loading unloading facilities they have, timing, etc., etc., and how it works. Because when we talked about it, one person said that their vehicles comes at this time, and then if you are restricting the timing, then we will lose so much of money because of this. So we need to find out a mechanism that if there is a warehouse, how we can, all, there are a lot of study needs to be done before we jumped into implementing or impose something like this in a particular cities. So I think background studies, and then planning out the things, giving them the facilities first. These are the facilities alternatives you have if you are doing this. Impact, go creating that impact with them, and then uh, after that only we can look into implementing a full-fledged low emission zones. So these are the two things I just want to highlight.
Just to add on to that, I think, as we mentioned before, looking at, making sure that the national policies and national regulations are very much in line with the coming from the cities as well. I mean, as Martin presented earlier, this should really be coming from national regulations. And for example, we have things like the France and Germany have the stickers. I know this is also mentioned in Vipul's knowledge brief, but really looking at how metropolitan areas can realign themselves to make sure that they're in accordance with these regulations and policies, and also looking at how they also adapt to the specific the local contexts as well, different land use planning, different demographics, everything. So I think this in itself is a particular challenge, and it's, as has been very much pushed, it's really working with your local stakeholders, really understanding, how to adapt, where to maybe look at, certain grace periods, how to communicate with your stakeholders, and really push and show the benefits that low emission zones can bring. And really, I think as well, just looking at kind of, I know this has already been mentioned, but really looking at kind of showing the tangible benefits. It's difficult when you don't have the data. And I think this is really key, because you need to, in a way, show the benefits through what improvements to air quality can bring for the reduced costs on health, the reduction in deaths, for example, because of air quality. I think Vipul mentioned 2.8 million people a year die because of air quality in India, and that's huge. So it's really looking about how to present this with data as well, because this is how you move forward, and this is how you present your evidence-based approaches to scale up the efforts as well.
So, I think all of you somewhere mentioned about the behavioral change, which plays an important role, and the kind of resistance that some people might have based on the preconceived notion that they have about the concept of LEZ. So that brings me to the next question, that as far as changing this behavior of the people or the behavioral change is concerned, what could be some of the ways in which the implementing authority can plan for something, maybe through some sort of communication or some other alternatives that should be there in place to bring about this behavioral change?
Shall I? Yeah, I mean, we already addressed that point of, I may call it striking fairness and we have created a term for it, environmental justice. There has been a study that refers to the data which we need. And of course, we had quite a good data about the social status of people living in Berlin. And we put it over our map where is the highest pollution, where do we have the highest noise levels. And then it turned out, the poor are living in the main roads where we have that terrible traffic, where they had the high noise and the high pollution, and the wealthy and the influential, they are living in the suburbs or in the nice neighborhoods, you know. So there's an environmental justice problem. But this is sort of on the recipient's side. But it's similar if you look at into the sort of creators of the problem, yeah, the vehicle fleet operators, and it were the small businesses which had the old vehicle fleet without a particle filter and without a sophisticated after treatment or whatever, you know. So if there would be the highest need to make a change and an improvement, but they cannot afford it. So there's also a fairness and a justice problem on their side, and we have to overcome that. And well, we need the money. So the society needs to manage that, the state. And that's why we need that funding programs on the one hand, and the data showing, okay, we have a fairness problem here. We need to reduce the impact of our transport systems on the environment and on other topics as far as possible to have a fair sharing of the problem, and also a fair sharing of contributions to solve it.
I would like to say that we somehow need to uh, work on this kind of awareness campaigns, where we are telling that let's create some temporary low emission zones for one day or few days and demonstrate it, and then look into the people's perception, and then find out the problems also during the temporary, when we are creating temporary low emission zones, and look into the solutions to those problems. I think basically creating this temporary zones will help. Some pilots um will help on building the capacity also, and creating the awareness also, and looking into and witnessing the benefits, how we can impose more on this. So I think that is the key, where to do the behavioral change, to demonstrate it temporarily, and then come into the permanent solutions and create a permanent low emission mobility zone. First thing is that with the citizens group. Second thing, we need to create I think all over world this is the problem, but especially in India, I want to highlight that we need to create this awareness and capacity building of the government departments also. For example, the engineers, so we need to go bottom up. So how we can build more capacity, it was mentioned in the presentation also. So the capacity building of the engineers in the department who is finally going to implement, the elected members like the mayors and the councillors of the city who is going to finally take the decisions, because they are the decision maker for the municipal corporations. So building capacity of them, creating more awareness around it, and looking into giving a clear picture of the benefits. I think that kind of awareness and capacity building will help to get it implemented soon. I'm giving you an example of Chandni Chowk, the Sahajanabad pedestrianization work that I did long back when I was in my previous organizations with the Delhi government. So that the same resistance happened when we were making it vehicle free, and only, even it's a low emission zones, rickshaws are allowed, the pedal rickshaws, and it's allowed. So there was resistance, but when we given them the 3D picture of this, and we did this temporary Ragari days, etc., etc., brought them on board, and we tell them, let's do it for a few days, and if it doesn't work, then we will withdraw. And it worked. It will work, because as a concept it is It is not a problem. It is working many of the cities across the world. So demonstrating it, and finally it become a beautiful low emission zone now, and people are enjoying, and business also increased, and we are getting a lot of international tourists there, lot of appreciation, lot of awards this project got. So that kind of case studies and demonstration is key to create a permanent low emission mobility zone.
For me, just to finish off, I guess, I think looking at low emission zones, not designing and implementing them in a silo, but really making sure that they're well integrated with other policies looking at multimodality and modal shift. I think looking at the case of London again, since they implemented, for example, the scrappage scheme to support people to get out of the most polluting cars, and obviously give them financial incentives to buy a replacement car or retrofitting. And I think since that they looked at, for example, the reduction in cars went down by 2%, but actually walking and cycling in that period increased by 22%, and bus travel went up by 16%. That's a huge amount, and actually the people who received the financial incentives to replace their car, a third of them chose not to. And actually 22% of people no longer have access to vehicles in their household. So that is a huge amount of people no longer driving and potentially then using walking, cycling and public transport. And I think we need to remember that low emission zones and with it potentially congestion charging is a tool to get people out of the most polluting vehicles, but you need the other supplementary policies that really push people into sustainable mobility, improving the public realm so that people want to walk, developing, integrated cycling and walking infrastructure. These are all ways to incentivize behavioral change. It's not just the one tool of low emission zones on its own. It really needs to be complemented and supplemented by those other policies.
Thank you so much. So we have actually overshot the time, and I'm really sorry we're not able to take the questions today, but we'll again organize a similar webinar and maybe get back. So I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all the speakers who took out time from the hectic schedule to be a part of this webinar and share their valuable insights, and also to the audience for patiently being a part of this webinar and listening to the speakers. I would like to inform that we are also organizing an e-bus training program scheduled between 27 to 28 June 2024 in India. And you can follow our webpage and social media handles to get further updates on the event. So yeah, thank you so much everyone for being a part of this webinar, and wish you all an amazing day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you too, in
Thank you.
particular for that paper, which is very, very helpful and informative, and hopefully it will spread around.
Yeah. Thank you. Do share the presentation by Martin and others so that we can also look into the data, and it will help us to build that dialogue within the government also. So it will be helpful to share the presentations by both the presenters.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
All the best.
Bye. All the best.